The horrifying truth that the Space Marines keep concealed from all mankind is something I was never supposed to reveal. I still recall the moment I first glimpsed them, looming in their deep blue armor, the living embodiments of the Emperor's divine warriors. At the time, I was nothing more than a sightless astropath, tasked with monitoring their Vox signals on the strike cruiser. Yet during the eerie stillness of the vessel's night cycle, I caught their chants shifting, no longer directed to the God Emperor, but toward some primordial, ravenous entity they named Cosetoare. A sharp, metallic tang of dread coated my tongue as their tones warped, chittering amid the phrases like swarming bugs. The instant I stumbled upon the gene vault by mistake, I grasped the reason they pursued me so relentlessly. Their forms were mutating. Their evolution had never fully concluded. What becomes of humankind's mightiest guardians when they cease to be human in any sense? I was only 9 Terran years old when the Ultramarines chapter's Space Marines descended upon Hydra. Despite my young age, I had already been marked as bearing the witch site. The black ships hadn't arrived to claim me yet, but the entire community anticipated it. My family concealed me during the arrival ceremonies, worried I might get seized prematurely. Curiosity got the better of me, though. I sneaked out of our hab block as they dozed and blended into the throngs gathered along the gleaming procession route. The noise struck me initially, a pounding cadence that pulsed right through the ferrocrete underfoot. Next appeared the colossal shapes clad in cobalt power armor, everyone a mobile bastion of ceramite and enhanced humanity. I gazed upward at them, my psychic vision pushing against the psychic restraints my father had drilled into me. Even behind those shields, I detected a vast, timeless aura emanating from their midst. It was like peering straight into a tempest's core. As one strode by, he swiveled his head toward me. His helm was removed, tucked under his arm. His skin gleamed like polished stone, his traits so flawlessly sculpted they appeared hewn by an artisan rather than grown naturally. But those eyes, Emperor, protect me. Those eyes held nothing human. They pierced right through me, beyond me, treating me as no more than a flimsy veil while he examined what hid in the shadows. I dropped to my knees unintentionally, not from reverence or wonder, though those sensations slammed into me like surging seas, but because my limbs simply abandoned their function. Right then, I comprehended the cleric's words about the sacred, not the comforting, protective holiness of a parent's hold, but the icy, merciless holiness of a bolt that descends without mercy. That visage stayed etched in my memory forever. Why wouldn't it? It belonged to an angel. We dubbed them the Emperor's angels. Yet angels aren't mortal beings, and as I would discover years afterward on the strike cruiser Dominus Vindictus, angels can tumble from grace at times, or perhaps they were never truly angelic to begin with. I am Tyron Lore. Once an Imperial astropath, officially approved and sworn to the God Emperor's cause. This is my chronicle of the horror I unearthed while stationed on the Dominus Vindictus, and the grounds for my conviction that the Space Marines conceal truths capable of crumbling the Imperium to dust if exposed. If this message finds you, it means my last broadcast has landed with an individual brave enough to heed it and shrewd enough to respond. The Inquisition will label me a blasphemer. The Adeptus Astartes will declare me a betrayer. But before rendering your verdict, absorb my words. Condemn me afterward if you're able. I joined the Dominus Vindictus 143 standard days prior. By Terran reckoning, it was deemed a privilege. Seldom do astropaths get selected to work in close proximity to the Adeptus Astartes, let alone the esteemed Ultramarines. I had compiled an exemplary history in the Imperial Navy across 27 years. My service was impeccable, my devotion unquestionable. Upon receiving the summons from Captain Agamemnon personally, I agreed instantly. How could I decline? They were the heirs of Guilliman, the paragons, the benchmark for every other chapter. The initial 30 days unfolded smoothly. I carried out my responsibilities diligently, upholding links with fellow Imperial ships and sporadically dispatching missives to remote planets as needed. The Marines seldom noticed my presence. That wasn't surprising. In their view, I amounted to just another implement, an organic specialist instead of a machine. Even so, I carried out my role with honor. My quarters lay in a modest room next to the vessel's main astropathic relay. Though calling it a full choir was a stretch. Just 2 fellow astropaths were on board, handling alternate watches. Our encounters were infrequent. By non-military measures, the space felt austere, yet it outshone the tight confines of typical Imperial Navy craft. I possessed a bunk, a workstation, a modest altar to the Emperor, and a personal lavatory. I lacked for little, aside from maybe some company. Such seclusion was typical for someone in my role. Astropaths seldom fit into relaxed gatherings. Our empty ocular voids, etched with the wounds of our soul binding connecting with the Emperor, often unsettles ordinary folk. As for the estates, they tend to stay tight-lipped about their affairs. It happened on the 47th night shift when I first picked up on something off. I was deep in meditation inside my quarters, letting my thoughts wander along the warp's flows, when I snagged a murmur, a snippet of talk not intended for my ears. Space Marines have strong defenses against mental probes. Their psyches are like iron bastions, drilled and boosted to fend off intruders. Yet right then, suspended in that hazy realm, bridging real space and the Imperium, I grazed an oddity, a thread of exchange, subtle yet clear. Initially, I figured it was just a routine Vox signal, but the rhythm and feel of it hinted at more. It echoed with the clear signature of psychic linkage. Not the rough mind push of a rogue psyker, but something polished, ceremonial. I paused, knowing that intentionally tuning into the Adeptus's confidential exchanges wasn't just against regs. It might get labeled as betrayal. Still, that innate inquisitiveness, the very spark that lured me to the processional way back in my youth, urged me on. I tuned in. The phrasing was in high Gothic, stiff and ancient, a chant I sensed or something prayer-like, though not aimed at the Emperor. The entity they summoned was alien to me, a rough, throaty utterance that my thoughts fumbled to grasp. Cosituare, it sounded like, or close to that. My command of Gothic is sharp, but this term didn't match any variant I'd studied. I pulled back at once. My pulse raced wildly, perspiration coating my skin even in the endless cold of the voidcraft. I convinced myself it was a slip, that prolonged warp contact had briefly scrambled my perceptions. Come morning, I visited the Wh40K, mentioning a slight ache in my head. The apothecary, a grim-visaged Astartes called Valeas, gave me a quick check before dosing me with a gentle calmer. He probed no further, and I offered nothing extra. Over the next 6 days, I handled my task smoothly, shoving the eerie episode aside. Then, on the 7th evening, as I rested on my bunk attempting rest, it returned, louder now. Cositare, heed our call, steer our weapons, receive our tributes. The tone was profound, vibrating with superhuman might. But underneath lurked another layer, a craving, an urgency. I bolted up, clamping my palms over my ears, useless as I knew it was. The message bypassed my body, slamming straight into my psyche. We wear your emblem. We spread your essence. Before long, the body will give way, and the reality will surface. I ought to have alerted someone. The slightest whiff of corruption in the Adeptus demands instant scrutiny from the Inquisition. But whom could I trust with this? One lone astropath accusing a famed chapter from the Imperium's annals of dabbling in outlawed rites. I'd face death for defamation at minimum, or be marked a traitor myself at maximum. Proof was essential, tangible signs that these echoes were genuine, not some warp-spawned hallucination. Thus, in my free time, I started focusing harder, extending my mental tendrils like fishing lines across the ocean of consciousnesses swarming the massive hull. Many shut me out. The Astartes' willpower was daunting, but as the vessel slipped into darkness and the bulk of the personnel withdrew to their bunks, I caught fleeting ideas and moods more readily, shards of reveries, hints of dreads, and now and then, when clusters of Marines convened in hidden compartments far below, those identical incantations. Cosuare, the term plagued my waking hours. I took to logging it all in a hidden record, noting each occurrence, timings, positions when I could pinpoint them, identities of Astartes involved if their psychic imprint stood out enough for recognition. Risky business, no doubt. Getting caught with that log would seal my doom. Yet, An irresistible pull kept me at it, fueled by the drive to unravel the mystery unfolding on the very starship I'd once felt privileged to join. By the 73rd day in my posting, I'd resolved to act. I'd seek visual corroboration of the voices, to behold firsthand the events of those ceremonies. Insanity, sure. Even pinpointing a session would be tough. How might a sightless astropath spy undetected? But I held a secret edge they overlooked. While my mortal eyes had scorched during the soul link to the Emperor, leaving mere ruined hollows, true darkness eluded me. Outsiders to the astropathic orders rarely grasp this, but plenty of us cultivate a psychic awareness, no ordinary eyesight, but a sensing of auras and shapes that lets us maneuver the cosmos nearly as well as the sighted. Certain astropaths even boast of sharper insight post-sanctioning, glimpsing strata of existence reality concealed from ordinary eyes. My psychic sight had forever been remarkably sharp. I didn't merely detect the tangible shapes surrounding me, I could also discern faint traces of their mental residue. Feelings etch traces. Ideas throw shades. Ceremonies and routines etch pathways that a skilled psyche can pursue. I bided my time until the vessel shifted into its dark phase, when the hallways held the fewest souls. Then I emerged from my chambers, gliding with the assured ease of someone long accustomed to his plight. I donned my usual garments, figuring that if I crossed paths with anyone, they'd chalk it up to me handling some formal errand. Astropaths often work odd shifts, our responsibilities shaped by the erratic flows of the warp more than any onboard timetable. I'd pinpointed the ceremonies occurring in the ship's underlevels, close to the fortified vault safeguarding the gene seed repository. That held logical appeal. The gene seed holds profound holiness for the Astartes, serving as the tangible bond tying every warrior to their Primarch. Should any taint or blasphemy be spreading among their ranks, it would surely revolve around the gene seed. I navigated downward via the twisting corridors of the assault cruiser, steering clear of primary routes and elevator shafts whenever feasible. On 2 occasions, I had to flatten myself into dim recesses as security teams marched by. My pulse hammered fiercely within my ribs, so fiercely I worried their augmented hearing might pick it up. Yet they continued onward, uninterrupted, their footsteps dissolving into the constant drone of the vessel's mechanisms. As I went lower, the structure shifted gradually. The practical halls of the higher sections yielded to elder, more elaborate tunnels, vaulted arches, rock cladding over adamantium barriers, sculptures honoring ancient Astartes legends, their visages eroded by centuries and pious caresses. I was venturing into the holy core of the craft, a realm off-limits to most humans. The mental vibrations intensified at every descending tier. Beyond the concentrated musings of solitary warriors, there pulsed a unified essence, a symphony of psyches united toward a shared goal. The atmosphere hung heavy, buzzing with latent energy akin to the hush preceding thunder. And lurking below it, a faint aberration that prickled my flesh, a jarring note amid what ought to have been the flawless, unified psychic harmony of devoted Astartes. I pursued that discord like a hound on a trail, allowing it to guide me further into the ship's depths. The chill deepened markedly. Vapors from my exhalations clouded the air before me. The steel flooring underfoot transitioned to weathered stone, timeless and scarred. From my training at the Scolum Progenium, I knew these markers well. I had crossed into a portion of the ship that harked back before the heresy, possibly to the era of the Great Crusade. The murmurs sharpened as I neared a spacious room that my mental faculties indicated lay just beyond. Not voiced in words, but relayed psyche to psyche in that identical ceremonial rhythm I'd sensed earlier. Cositare hidden truth locked in gene and bone. We are your vessels. We prepare the way. I arrived at a colossal portal of somber alloy, inscribed with the Ultramarine's emblem and elaborate motifs that strained my psychic gaze to behold. It stood barred, just as I'd foreseen, yet a locked barrier seldom daunts one endowed with my talents. No physical breach was required to glimpse the interior. I laid my hand upon the icy surface and projected my awareness forward, gliding past the solid obstruction as effortlessly as mortals might traverse a veil of mist. The spectacle inside would eternally undermine my trust in the Adeptus Astartes. The room stretched immense, its roof vanishing into gloom even amid the blaze of countless tapers along the perimeter. In the middle rose a round platform of ebony rock, encircled by 13 crouched space marines, helmets discarded but power armor intact. In the wavering glow of the flames, their countenances appeared strangely malleable, as though the traits weren't fully set. Upon the platform rested what I initially mistook for a coffin, an enormous vessel of polished steel, its exterior carved with runes akin to the doors, yet more intricate, more sinister. As I observed, the cover parted with a hiss of pneumatics. A shaft of ghostly azure radiance ascended from inside, gathering into a holographic image hovering over the revealed enclosure. I anticipated the likeness of a Primarch, maybe Robert Guilliman in person. Instead, what emerged challenged all reason. The form was vaguely manlike, but only at its core. Its build was distorted, appendages excessively elongated and hinged at unnatural points. The skull stretched unnaturally, forking at the chin into jaw-like appendages beyond any human's capacity. Yet it was the orbs that held me captive. Scores of them, studding the entity's body like glowing pustules, every single one winking on its own among the rest. Cosituare. The Space Marines chanted in unison, their chants echoing through both the physical air and the warp-touched realm. Father of the concealed way, builder of the ultimate metamorphosis. The grotesque hololith horror lifted its distorted appendages in a gesture that could pass for a blessing. When it uttered words, the noise skipped past my hearing altogether, implanting itself straight into my mind. My offspring, it declared, its tone like stones scraping across crystal. The era of unveiling draws near. The kernel I sowed 10,000 years past is ripening toward harvest. In moments, the shift will reach fulfillment. One of the warriors rose and advanced toward the pedestal. From my ethereal viewpoint, I knew him at once. Captain Omen, overseer of the Vigil, ranking just below Manio Calgar in the chapter's command structure. He stripped off his right glove and thrust his uncovered palm into the beam of radiance. The skin on his limb started to undulate, as though something writhed underneath. In dread, I observed his digits stretching out, joints multiplying twofold, then threefold, transforming his grasp into something akin to the armored limb of an alien insect rather than any human feature. The alteration brought him no agony. In fact, his countenance, now sharply etched in my mental vision, showed pure, enraptured bliss. "The alterations speed up, mighty Cosito," Aemon stated. "Through every clash, through every fresh infusion of gene seed, we draw nearer to your blueprint, yet obstacles arise. The Inquisition suspects specific anomalies they have spotted in our latest initiates, and Gilman shifts in his crypt on Macragge. Should he rouse, Gilliman is merely one aspect of my essence, divided ages ago, the being cut in. A splinter granted autonomy to fulfill my broader intent. His stirring holds no worry. In truth, it could hasten our schemes, proceed as commanded, amplify the strength of the accelerant in the upcoming gene seed batch. Those unfit to endure the change were never fit containers anyway. I pulled back from the portal, yanking my awareness away so swiftly that I almost unraveled. My corporeal form staggered rearward, a gasp of refusal surging up before I choked it down. The noise bounced off the deserted hallway. For a horrifying instant, I remained rooted, convinced I'd revealed myself, yet no alert sounded. No colossal figures in power armor crashed in to seize me. Perhaps the ancient alloy's density had dampened my slip, or the Astartes were too immersed in their profane ceremony to detect it. I didn't linger to discover the truth. I spun around and bolted, abandoning any pretense of caution or concealment. Escape was all that counted now. Distance. I had to flee, absorb the horror I'd glimpsed, figure out some response to combat this abomination. As I dashed along, my thoughts spun with consequences. The Ultramarines, exemplars of the Emperor's righteousness, stood tainted. Far from simply drifting from his glow, they seemed locked in a plot stretching back to their legion's inception, maybe even to the Primarch's forging. And if a founding chapter like theirs concealed such darkness, what about the rest? How far did this rot extend? I made it to my cabin undetected, though luck or some hidden intent guided me. Who can tell? Safely within, I engaged the seclusion seals and dropped to my knees at my modest altar to the Emperor. I beseeched direction with unprecedented fervor, seeking insight, resolve, any rationale that might reframe the atrocity I'd beheld as less than the universe-rending betrayal it surely was. Silence answered, broken only by my thundering pulse. Rest evaded me through the dark hours. I prowled my cramped space like a trapped beast. Visions of the ritual replayed ceaselessly in the voids of my sightless eyes. I weighed my paths, limited as they felt. I might alert the Inquisition straight away. But how? The vessel's astropathic cadre was my sole link for distant outreach, under perpetual watch by the crew's superiors. Any unsanctioned signal would trigger instant scrutiny. And supposing I managed to dispatch a warning, what proof did I hold save my lone account? An astropath's claim pitted against the Ultramarine's storied repute would sway few. I could try collecting further proof, sneak back to that accursed room, devise a method to capture or chronicle the events there. Yet the peril loomed vast. Discovery meant torment and death. And armed with my fresh grasp of the Marine's hidden essence, I suspected my end would prove neither swift nor merciful. Or I could stay silent. Resume my role, feign ignorance of the visions and echoes, maybe seek reassignment come the next port, blaming frailty or another fitting pretext. But the notion crumbled even as it surfaced. Whatever unfolded on the Dominus Vindictus, whatever deviance the Ultramarines pursued, it posed a dire peril to the imp. The very essence of the Imperium, I felt compelled to speak out to humankind. My conscience wouldn't allow me to stay quiet any longer. As the vessel's systems shifted to mimic daylight, I reached my resolve. I'd press on with my probe, but with utmost wariness. I'd require partners, data, supplies, none of which would prove simple to obtain on a craft dominated by those I now distrusted as perpetrators of the gravest betrayal. Over the following few days, I carried out my responsibilities with robotic efficiency, revealing none of the storm raging within me. I captured and forwarded messages as demanded. I joined in the routine ceremonies of upkeep and readiness that shaped existence for everyone serving on board. Yet throughout, my thoughts churned, strategizing, assessing, hunting for any means to verify my doubts and notify the appropriate overseers. On the 79th day of my posting, a chance arose. The Dominus Vindictus got directives to link up with an inquisitorial craft, the Emperor's Judgment, close to the Halo stars, a collaborative effort targeting alleged genostellar incursions on an Imperial extraction planet. In ordinary times, I'd have no personal dealings with the inquisitorial agents, but their ship carried an astropathic choir leader, Savine Mendel, someone I'd studied alongside years ago at the Adeptus Astra Telepathica Center on Terra. If I managed discreet contact with Savine, I might relay my worries. An inquisitor possessed the power and means to scrutinize the Ultramarines thoroughly, to ascertain whether my observations signaled real heresy or merely a misinterpretation stemming from my lack of knowledge. The link-up was set for 3 days later. That span gave me time to devise a strategy, pinpointing precisely what details I'd disclose and in what manner. Sharing too scant risked me being brushed off as frantic or unhinged. Revealing excessive without solid proof could paint me as the traitor instead. During that period, I focused on meticulous groundwork, mentally drafting and refining the dispatch I'd try to forward to Savine. Meanwhile, I kept up my hidden surveillance of the Marines, especially Captain Argeman and the ones I'd pegged as involved in the ceremony. I spotted faint shifts in their conduct that had escaped me previously, the odd tilts of their heads at impossible angles when they believed themselves unobserved, the faint clicks that sometimes punctuated their dialogue, resembling jaws clacking just under their utterances, the spasms in their armored fists, digits fanning out and realigning in ways no human limbs could manage. Minor signs, easy to shrug off in isolation. But combined, they wove a tapestry too alarming to overlook. The evening prior to the rendezvous, I committed a grave blunder. Driven to collect proof, I tried infiltrating the ship's information vaults, probing for entries on gene seed repositories, insertion methods, or irregularities flagged in apothecary checks. I possessed modest expertise with cogitator networks, sufficient to skirt the routine safeguards on typical onboard operations. Yet, the gene seed logs were shielded by advanced defenses. My awkward efforts set off muted alerts across the framework. I grasped my error far too late. By the moment I pulled away from the console and withdrew to my cabin, enforcement servitors were already deploying across the ship. A broadcast echoed through the halls, commanding all surplus crew to stay put in their posts pending updates. A violation in security had surfaced. They avoided singling me out, but such wasn't necessary. Only a handful on board held both the clearance and incentive to probe those specific documents. It wouldn't take them much time to link the breach to my station. My window had shrunk to hours, maybe moments. I barricaded myself inside my room, though I nursed no false hopes that a mere seclusion seal would deter Space Marines determined to seize me. I weighed erasing my log, but rejected the idea. Should they apprehend me, the record of my findings could serve as my sole leverage, my lone shot at being listened to prior to sentencing. Rather, I crafted a dispatch, not the deliberate balanced note I'd intended for Savine, but a frantic, pressing alert. I secured it with codes exclusive to high-ranking astropaths, concealing it amid routine warp static. Should the Emperor show grace, it would find its way to one bold and empowered enough to respond. I'd barely finished sending it when my door burst open in a thunderous blast. The telepathic backlash of fury that surged with the breach almost felled me. I reeled against the opposite bulkhead as three enormous silhouettes blocked the entry. Space Marines clad in complete war harness, their bolters leveled squarely at my torso. Their helmets hid. Their visors concealed their expressions, yet the venomous animosity pouring from them was unmistakable even without seeing their faces. In the midst of the trio loomed a fourth figure, a Space Marine whose power armor bore the telltale white helmet and narthecium limbs that identified him as a healer of the chapter. It was Velas, the very apothecary who had tended to my wounds mere weeks prior. Astropath Tyron Law, his voice crackled through the helmet's Vox unit, devoid of warmth and echoing with mechanical detachment. You stand accused of breaching secure data vaults without permission. Submit now for questioning. Denial would serve no purpose, nor would any show of defiance. With deliberate care, I lifted my hands, palms facing them in the age-old sign of yielding. I will accompany you without incident, I replied, forcing calm into my tone even as dread tightened around my windpipe. However, I demand a meeting with Captain Amon. The revelations I've uncovered threaten the welfare of this ship, and perhaps the Imperium at large. A grating electronic snicker burst from Valas's helm, far removed from human chuckle or the grim humor of a superhuman soldier. It resembled the chittering of insects in frenzy, armored exoskeletons scraping together in some profane union. You'll get your meeting, Astropath, he intoned, though I suspect it won't unfold the way you envision. Two of the warriors advanced, clamping my arms in grips that left bruises blooming on my skin. I offered no opposition as they hauled me from my chambers and into the hallway outside. Pointless rebellion held no honor. Far wiser to husband my energy for the ordeals to come, staying vigilant for whatever faint chance of escape might arise. Rather than the expected path to the detention cells or a known inquiry room from my long tenure in the Emperor's service, they propelled me further into the ship's bowels, along the very archaic passages I'd navigated during my clandestine excursion just nights ago. My spirits plummeted as the truth dawned. Our route led to the right hall, toward the abomination they revered as Cosituare. The trek blurred into a haze of panic and fervent invocations. I murmured every safeguarding prayer etched in my memory, invoking saints whose litanies I could summon. Whether the Emperor listened seemed unlikely. If he did, he opted for silence, perhaps forsaking this tainted craft and its fallen protectors as well. At last we arrived before the colossal rune-etched portals I'd glimpsed earlier. This time, they parted smoothly as we neared, exposing the immense hall within. My psychic senses had hinted at its dread, but confronting it in the flesh amplified the horror manifold. The atmosphere hung heavy with fragrant smoke, laced by a cloying, decaying stench akin to spoiled produce. The myriad tapers along the walls persisted, yet closer inspection revealed their substance wasn't waxen, but pale, semi-transparent and insectile in texture. The vast dais commanded the chamber's heart still. Atop it squatted the coffin-shaped vessel, now unsealed with no flickering hollow projection emanating from its depths. In its stead, a colossal form loomed nearby, towering beyond even the stature of Astartes' elites. Captain Aemon pivoted to face us upon our entry, drawing an involuntary gasp of revulsion from my lips. The countenance that had once embodied the dignified severity of ultramarine commanders had twisted beyond recognition. A fissure ran vertically down his mandible, exposing serrated fangs that plunged into a gullet throbbing with aberrant sinew. His gaze, formerly a sharp azure, had proliferated, auxiliary and minor eyes orbiting the central duo like attendant moons, each winking asynchronously as they fixated on our advance, lenses sharpening and blurring in tandem. "Astropath," he uttered, the timbre retaining a vestige of humanity amid the grotesque reshaping of his maw. "You've been quite industrious, it appears, delving into forbidden records, dispatching unsanctioned transmissions, eavesdropping on holy ceremonies. Did you honestly assume such transgressions would escape detection?" They shoved me down onto my knees in his presence, the Astartes' hands like vices on my frame. Though the grotesque alteration of Aemon's features churned bile in my gut, I held my stare level. Quote, "Two," I declared, startled by my own composure. Quote, a undulation swept across Aemon's twisted features, briefly contorting them into an echo of wry delight. "Heresy," he echoed, the syllable elongating and warping through his deformed orifice. "How narrow your view. What you deem heresy, we hail as transcendence, advancement, the realization of a blueprint initiated 10 millennia past, when the Emperor forged the Primarchs not merely as warlords for his legions, but as conduits for a force surpassing even his own might." With a sweep of his limb, he indicated the yawning sarcophagus. Cositoare predated the Emperor's rise. A warp-born essence indeed, yet no brutish horror kin to the quartet now lording over that dimension. Cositoare embodies finesse, endurance, the gradual, unrelenting force of transformation, etching through epochs. The Emperor never truly vanquished him, contrary to what your imperial annals claim. Instead, he forged an alliance, offering up 20 sons as the foundational elements from which a fresh regime would one day emerge. I shook my head in denial, scorning the heresy, even as a dark foreboding took hold in my thoughts. The Primarchs, crafted by the Emperor, yet dispersed by mysterious entities before his schemes could fully materialize. The stark variations among Space Marine chapters that went far beyond simple creeds or customs, the recurring flaws in gene seed demanding vigilant oversight and purging. "The Horus heresy," I murmured, "the split between loyalist and traitor legions." Aemon chuckled once more, that identical eerie, otherworldly cackle I'd caught from Vale earlier. "Merely a hindrance, no worse. Cosito's grand scheme spans eons, not just fleeting ages. Certain carriers faltered, yielding too swiftly to alteration, succumbing to grotesque changes and insanity. Others, such as the Sons of Gilman, were intended for a more gradual evolution, one that's restrained, more subtle. He drew nearer, his warped visage dominating my vision. The stench rising from him wasn't the sterile, clinical aroma I linked to Space Marines. It was earthy, vital, like the reek of some beast in mid-shed, sloughing off its old shell to unveil the new one lurking below. "We represent his genuine heirs," Aemon rasped, "not the debased devotees of those destructive entities who frittered away their promise on trivial divinity and excess, nor the inert hounds who slavishly trail after a cadaver they dub Emperor. We form the link connecting mankind's origins to its destined evolution." I yearned to refute his assertions, to cast them aside as the delirium of a renegade, a betrayer who'd forsaken the Emperor's radiance. Yet I'd logged too many cycles in the Imperial administration, witnessed too many discrepancies in the sanctioned chronicles to brush off his arguments completely. The Imperium rested on concealed truths, on deceptions justified to uphold stability amid the vast multitudes populating its domains. Suppose this was just another grim reality veiled from everyone, save the uppermost tiers of authority? No, I refuse to let such uncertainty burrow in. Regardless of what Aemon and his tainted kin professed, no matter the ancient bargain they conjured in their minds, their deeds posed an immediate and dire threat to mankind, to the Imperium I'd vowed to uphold. "You're misguided," I declared. "Tainted by Xenos' sway or warped taint, the Emperor fashioned the Primarchs as his commanders, his offspring, not as containers for some primordial horror." Aemon rose to his full height, his array of eyes fluttering in intricate rhythms. "Your views hold no weight, Astropath, nor does your destiny. But prior to merging with the ranks of those who've unearthed our reality across the ages, you'll fulfill one last role." He motioned to Valis, who advanced, the servo arms of his Narthesium unfolding with exacting accuracy. "The apothecary has devised a technique for harvesting and safeguarding the recollections of psyker minds. Your insights, your encounters, including this very exchange, shall be archived and examined. We need to grasp how you breached our psychic barriers, how you discerned our ceremonies notwithstanding the safeguards erected. Such vulnerabilities must be eradicated as we near the culmination of our metamorphosis." Vale positioned himself at my rear, his power-armored fists clamping my cranium with crushing strength, tilting it to bare the neural sockets at my nape. "Every astropath undergoes such implantation in their indoctrination, conduits aiding us in harnessing and channeling our gifts. Now, those identical devices appeared poised to plunder my psyche in manners their architects never envisioned. I sensed the icy press of alloy against my skin as the Narthesium linked to my neural links. A piercing stab surged through my head, trailed by an insidious torpor that crept down my frame, immobilizing my extremities while sparing my awareness. "Commence the harvest," Aemon commanded. The torment defied words, surpassed tolerance. It felt like each recollection, each notion, each sliver of self was being wrenched bodily from my cortex, fiber by fiber. I shrieked until my cries faded, then persisted in silent torment within, powerless to voice the torment as my form stayed frozen in contrived stillness. Throughout, I stayed wretchedly alert, cognizant of Valis looming over me, of the apparatuses whirring as they captured and filed away my mental essence, of Aemon observing via his cluster of gazes, his cleft maw grinding in that insectile snap that would forever haunt my reveries. I can't recall the duration of the ordeal. Duration dissolves when each instant stretches into endless woe. Yet at last the anguish ebbed, supplanted by a vacant void, a deprivation so utter it eclipsed mere bodily feeling. Fragments of my being had vanished, surgically removed, sequestered in the savage contraptions the fallen apothecary had affixed, my neural augmentations. "Quote Danich," Valius announced, his words echoing as if from some remote echo chamber. "Core memory cores duplicated and erased. Core personality framework safeguarded for additional analysis. Physical controls intact, yet unresponsive." Aemon bent toward me, his warped visage blurring in and out as my sight flickered. "Do you register my voice, Astropath? Do you grasp the changes inflicted upon you? You persist in a manner, yet the individual you embodied, that core self you held dear, has been excised. Still, your form holds value, a container akin to ours, albeit of markedly lesser craftsmanship." I strained to retort, to hurl curses with the scant rebellion left within, but my mouth refused to stir. My tongue rested lifeless inside. I managed breaths, managed blinks, managed to sense the surroundings, yet interaction eluded me. I was now merely an observer within my own skin. "Convey him to the adaptation vault," Ajamin commanded. "His psionic talents render him prime material for the upcoming reproduction cycle. We discard none." Reproduction? The term reverberated through the empty void where my sense of self had dwelled. Reproducing what? Toward what aim? Yet no replies emerged as the warriors hoisted my limp frame and bore me away from the ceremonial hall. The hallways streaked by in a fractured haze. My awareness splintered, fragments of cognition flickering like disrupted comms amid a warp tempest. I caught sights of adjacent rooms veering from the central routes, labs brimming with churning basins of liquid where incomplete forms throbbed and twisted, confinement units housing shapes that could have passed for once human, their frames contorted into forms defying label as either baseline or alien. And throughout, that emblem I'd noted carved on the ceremonial portals, that complex glyph that stung my mental gaze to dwell on. At last, its meaning dawned. It surpassed mere ornamentation or forbidden marking. It embodied a genetic schema, the template for the metamorphosis these tainted Astartes endured. They transported me to a compact enclosure buried in the vessel's underbelly. In contrast to the lavish ceremonial area, this space gleamed with surgical austerity. Steel slabs fitted with bindings, medical tools laid out in exacting order, reservoirs of frothing sustenance linked to infusion lines and surveillance gear. They divested me of my garments and fastened me onto a slab, the bonds superfluous amid my immobilized condition. Valius neared once more, his narthecium humming as it adjusted for an impending operation. Quote 7. He intoned, his tone laced with that eerie resonant drone. The progeny from your hereditary essence could function effectively as dedicated relay conduits for succeeding lineages. Progeny reproduction. The notion summoned visions too nightmarish to dwell upon. What sort of monstrosities did these deviant Astartes forge in the cruiser's hidden depths, and for whose benefit? Valus likely discerned the inquiry in my gaze, the sole feature under my command for conveyance. He drew nearer, his helm doffed to expose a countenance far more altered than Aemon's. Whereas the leader's shift appeared midway, the apothecary's had progressed deeply. His skull stretched into an egg-like form, the dome swollen to shelter an intellect evidently surpassing human bounds. His mandible had split entirely into jaw-like extensions that clattered and rasped during speech. "You question our intent," he stated. "The reason we tread this route of alteration? The supreme objective propelling us to accept what you deem defilement?" One of his narthecium limbs protruded, a spike-tipped probe lingering beside my frozen visage. I might reveal it all. I could outline the vast scheme ignited prior to the Imperium's founding. I could depict the splendor reserved for those bold enough to transcend the constraints the Emperor decreed for humanity. Yet those ideas demand a framework you lack, bereft as you are with your essence largely stripped away. The spike lowered, breaching the skin at my throat. An icy chill radiated from the puncture. A surge of pharmacological numbness widened the gulf between me and my form's destiny. Rather, you shall encounter reality firsthand. Your tissue will be refashioned, your genome extracted and fused with chosen traits from our altered progenoid stock. Emergent crossbreeds might fall short of pure Astartes prowess, but they shall excel in niche duties, relaying messages, charting courses, or maybe penetrating rival imperial factions. As the sedatives gripped, my mind commenced wandering, severed from the shell that had sheltered it across years. I hovered over the procedure platform, an ethereal witness as Valeas and his aides commenced their gruesome procedure. Cuts were carved, specimens extracted. My form, though still nominally vital, had devolved into mere biological feedstock, methodically despoiled for the sake of their perverse advancement. Yet a flicker of ego persisted, a kernel of essence that their neural harvesting devices couldn't fully uproot. Maybe it stemmed from my link to the Emperor, established in the soul-binding ceremony that had stripped away my mortal vision, yet bestowed a superior perception. Or perhaps it was just the tenacious endurance of the human soul, defying oblivion amid utter ruin. Regardless of the reason, I gripped that flicker tightly while my perception drifted further from the alteration room, distant from my profaned remains, piercing the hulls and levels of the Dominus Vindictus, drawn by an invisible force I couldn't perceive or oppose. I arrived in the astropathic choir hall, the site where I'd carried out my responsibilities for months, prior to uncovering the horrifying reality concerning my overseers. It stood vacant now, the fellow astropaths likely restricted to their cabins amid the lockdown my deeds had provoked. Yet the choir hall was never wholly deserted. The bespoke machinery inside, built to intensify and direct psyker forces for dispatch across the warp, thrummed with dormant energy. And right in the heart of the space shimmered the ghostly form of the vessel's astropathic lattice, the synthetic framework that synchronized and boosted our talents. I'd collaborated with the lattice every day in my tenure on board. I'd mastered its rhythms, its vibrations, its distinctive hum. Freed from bodily constraints, I perceived it as beyond simple machinery. It formed a hub, a convergence between material reality and the Imperium, a portal. With no stakes remaining, I propelled myself toward that radiant hub. My mind, shattered and partial, yet fueled by frantic intent, fused with the lattice. The feeling eluded words. It wasn't agony, despite matching agony's ferocity. It wasn't ecstasy, though it echoed ecstasy's liberation. It was metamorphosis, elevation. I no longer existed as Tyran Law, astropath of the Imperium, but evolved into another entity, one both greater and lesser than humanity. I turned into the dispatch itself, the lattice meant to relay the honed psyches of skilled astropaths over the abyss, now broadcasting the entirety of my surviving self. My history, my revelations, my alerts, all distilled into one unified pulse and launched into the warp backed by the full might of the Dominus Vindictus's astropathic system. I sensed myself elongate and warp as the warp stream seized me, ripping the remnants of my awareness into dispersed shards. But every shard bore the identical pressing alert. Every shard of my prior identity sped outward in every direction, hunting for open psyches, hunting for support. The majority would vanish, eroded by the turbulent surges of the Imperium, or consumed by the beasts prowling those non-physical abysses. A few could arrive so twisted as to defy understanding, but maybe, should the Emperor yet guard his realm, a single shard could endure whole. A lone alert could arrive at minds capable of responding. As my awareness scattered, I glimpsed brief visions of the Materium from angles beyond fleshly limits. I viewed the Dominus Vindictus from afar, a speck of alloy floating in the boundless emptiness. I spotted other vessels, other planets streaking by at inconceivable velocity as my shards rocketed toward them via the warp. And I beheld something more, something immense and enduring, spanning epochs and distances in a network of insidious sway. Cosito, not merely as a being or even a warp deity, but as a concept, a mechanism, the personification of evolution, operating via innumerable hosts over 10,000 years toward some unfathomable end. I recognized Ganseed, that wondrous compound reshaping common soldiers into space marines for its authentic nature. Not an imperial boon to uplift mankind, but a carrier, a conduit for alterations too insidious to notice until they'd advanced past reversal. Alterations now nearing a pivotal stage within select chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. The Ultramarines weren't alone in their taint. They had merely progressed farther down the route than others, their shift hastened by an unidentified trigger. Yet every Astartes harbored the seed of Kusari, sown at their inception, fostered by each conflict, each injury, each infusion of fresh gene seed stock. This was the dread revelation I'd unearthed, the covert that the Space Marines concealed from humankind. They weren't, and had never been, the flawless soldiers the Emperor envisioned. They served as cradles for something novel, something that would ultimately surpass the bounds of humankind and the legions themselves. I couldn't determine if this shift would bring salvation to our species or lead to its utter demise. The intentions of beings such as Costoare go beyond such simplistic divisions. Yet I was utterly convinced that the Imperium, built upon devotion to the Emperor and the sanctity of human purity, would crumble under the weight of this discovery. My alert, dispatched from a fading psyche shattered by injury and warp corruption, would probably be brushed off as the delusions of a broken intellect. The proof I'd compiled, tucked away in a log now likely obliterated by the Marines, would never arrive at the hands of those empowered to respond. And, supposing it did, would they dare confront the Adeptus Astartes, the Emperor's elite guardians, relying solely on one astropath's account? These reflections, my last clear thoughts as Tyran Law, faded away with the rest of my awareness. The shards of my essence, bearing their dire caution, slipped into the vast emptiness of the warp. My life concluded not in honorable demise while serving the Emperor, but in fragmentation, nothingness. Nevertheless, somehow I persist in speaking. I continue to caution. Against all probability, a piece of me endured the warp's voyage, locating a mind open to my signal and able to relay it onward. It might be you or another who encounters these lines and grasps their gravity. The Space Marines are undergoing alteration, have been since their inception, and the pace quickens with every year, every fresh cycle of gene seed integration. The indicators exist for any keen observer. Deviations labeled as anomalies, bodily traits blamed on chapter lineage, conduct explained away as tactical approaches or customs. Observe them closely, examine them. Pay attention to their movements when they think they're unobserved. Tune into their confidential vox chatter, buried under layers of codes. Mark the faint contrasts between the venerated ancient dreadnoughts and the latest Primaris models, claimed to be more refined than their forebears, yet actually veered onto an alternate developmental route. They aren't what they seem, not as the Imperial legends depict. The angels of death have descended, unaware of their own descent. In this downfall, they risk pulling all of humanity into a chasm of metamorphosis from which escape is impossible. I am Tyron Law. Once an astropath, I loyally served the Emperor. I uncovered a horror too vast to hold back. Now, I am no more. My body, repurposed by the very warriors I once honored. My mind, strewn across the cosmos. Only this dispatch remains, this admonition. Take it seriously. Respond to it. Before the metamorphosis finishes, before Costoire's magnificent scheme reaches its climax, before the Space Marines stop being humanity's defenders and turn into the engineers of its annihilation. Emperor, shield us, everyone. I dread that even he might not have anticipated the real essence of the tools he forged to defend mankind. The legions Astartes were intended as humanity's bulwark, but bulwarks can be wielded against the very souls they were made to defend. And armaments can claim their own destiny, apart from their maker's vision. The broadcast concludes here. I've used up the remnants of my clarity, the dying echoes of self that outlasted my unraveling in the warp. If my alert finds those bold enough to heed it, that's beyond my sight. If humanity endures the unveiling of its guardian's hidden reality, that's unforeseeable. I depart now toward whatever destiny claims those who don't perish but dissolve. Maybe the Emperor will collect the lost pieces of my mind and bestow the serenity I never knew in existence, or total void might seize me, snuffing out my fleeting spark of sentience in the boundless night amid the stars. No matter what lies ahead, I meet it assured that I've fulfilled my utmost duty. I have observed, I have borne witness, I have alerted. The outcome rests with you. Be you who you are or whoever you evolve into, I am Tyron Law. I was an astropath. I beheld the reality, and now you have too.